Okay, so you're looking for camera gear and you may be confused trying to figure out what camera gear is right for you. Cameras are very expensive and there's a lot of intricate details and specifications surrounding the cameras themselves and the lenses you can purchase for those systems. So I wanted to create this video to explain the different things that might be important to what you're trying to shoot and offer some suggestions and recommendations that are available in different budget classes from each of the brands. So, regardless of what you're shooting, we'll talk about what aspects of lenses and cameras lean towards what you're shooting. And then by the end of the video, you'll have a couple of options that make perfect sense for what you're doing, and you'll understand why they make sense and which one appeals to you. And then, therefore, you can go on with your buying decisions. All right, so one of the first questions you want to ask yourself and get solidified is knowing what you're trying to shoot. So you may not have a very clear idea of what that is yet. If you're upgrading your kit and you've already had a camera, you probably have a clearer idea of what that is. But as you're looking for cameras and understanding camera gear, knowing what you're going to use the camera for specifically is a huge benefit when searching for camera gear because I built my kit piece by piece, and getting the pieces that were more versatile and useful for what I was shooting to begin with made it so much easier to take my time and build my kit over time. If you get a highly specialized lens or highly specialized camera to begin with that does one thing very well, but isn't versatile enough for all of the things that you're trying to shoot, you might pigeonhole yourself a little bit. So, even if you don't know specifically what you're shooting, just knowing that if you're going to be doing just photo or video or a little bit of both, or doing portraits or sports or landscapes, understanding just the genre or the general idea of what you'll be using your camera for is super helpful moving forward. And if you don't know what it is and you're not interested in anything specific, uh, that's great too. You can find camera gear that's very versatile and will allow you to dabble in a little bit of anything, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none build. And there are builds that are geared towards that. Now that you have an idea of what you're trying to shoot, the next question you want to ask yourself is whether you need a full frame sensor, which is the larger, more professional grade sensor, or you can deal with a crop sensor or an APS-C sensor. Those sensors are in cameras that are typically smaller, lighter, cheaper, and the lenses in crop sensor cameras are cheaper as well and smaller. Or if you want to go for a full frame camera, they're typically higher image quality, better in low light, and those cameras have professional features, but they're typically a lot more expensive, and especially the lenses for those systems are a lot more expensive as well. So whether you need a small, compact, portable kit that's more economical or a more rigid professional setup with professional features, the sensor size is going to be the thing that delineates both of them. So look into full frame sensors or APS-C or crop sensors. The next thing that you want to consider after your sensor size is the brand ecosystem that you'll be investing in. It is actually a huge thing within the camera community. People have very strong allegiance to brands. I'm one of them. I love Sony. As you can see, I have a Sony shirt on right now. I've been shooting Sony for the last 10 years, but there are wonderful options from all of the brands available on the market. It's really just the attributes of the different brands that you want to think about before you invest in their system. So there are Fuji, Olympus, Sony, Canon, Nikon, just to name a few that are out there. In this video, I'll just focus on the three major brands that most people consider when they're looking for options, which is going to be Sony, Canon, and Nikon. I'll start with Sony because that's what I shoot and that's what I am familiar with the most. The reason why I selected Sony as the brand that I would invest in is because at the time when I started with the original A7, they had democratized their mount. So I am able to use a plethora of aftermarket lenses with my camera, including brands like Sigma, Tamron, and Viltrox, which allows me to have multiple lens options available to me at multiple price points that do specific things. And I love that freedom of being able to pick any lens out there on the market at different price points to get the job done. Also, I think Sony has the best autofocus system out there out of all of the brands. I've shot both Canon and Nikon as well, and I am really a fan of Sony's autofocus. Their tracking, it is almost flawless when I use it, so I'm a big fan of it. So the biggest reason for me though is the fact that I have so many lens options, and as I'll detail further along in this video, having options for lenses is a really good thing. So moving into Canon, Canon is a fantastic brand for people just starting out in photography or videography because they offer so many APS-C options. They have the R100, the R50, the R10, the R50V, the R7. So there's so many different models that they have for APS-C size sensors. Uh, and they also have very professional grade cameras as well for the R6, the R5, and the R3. They've been around for a very long time. They've made some of the best DSLR cameras, and they're moving on to creating wonderful mirrorless cameras as well. One thing that you should know with the Canon ecosystem is that if you do select a full frame camera or you're in the market looking for a full frame camera, Canon does not open their full frame mount. So if you're looking for lenses for your Canon full frame camera, you must buy Canon lenses. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're a fantastic lens manufacturer, but if the only option you have is a Canon lens and that is outside your budget, you're kind of out of luck. That's the only lens available and you have to purchase it or you have to save up to buy it. So I enjoy having a little bit more freedom than that. If you're purchasing one of their APS-C cameras, they have opened that mount. Sigma lenses and Tamron lenses are available for that mount. Moving on to Nikon. My first camera was actually a Nikon. I had a D3200. I love that little guy. It got me super inspired into photography. I took fantastic photos that are still on my portfolio today with my D3200, and they have really come a long way from the DSLRs that they've made. All three brands are focusing on the mirrorless systems, and that's what I'll be talking about today. Nikon has a two APS-C options. They have the Nikon Z30 and the Nikon Z50. Both of those come with the cropped sensor, and they have some full frame options for you as well. They have an entry level Z5 all the way up to their pro grade Z9, which has a built-in battery grip. All of those options are fantastic cameras from all three brands. One thing to note with Nikon is they do have an open lens mount just like Sony does, and their lens mount is the most adaptable, so you can even adapt Sony lenses onto your Nikon camera. However, Nikon's lens mount is very new, so lens manufacturers are trying to catch up by manufacturing lenses for that mount. So there aren't too many options out there available for that mount, but there will be in the future as it is open and manufacturers are moving towards it. So when you're thinking about Sony, Canon, and Nikon, think about the size of your sensor, full frame or cropped, how many options each of those brands have for that sensor, and whether or not there are lens options that are within your budget and specialized for what you're trying to shoot for those options. So for me, Sony is the easiest because their mount has been open for a very long time. There's so many options, but Canon cameras have a certain charm to them, certain feel. Nikon cameras are very rugged, reliable, and they have certain attributes about them. So that's one of the things you should definitely consider after figuring out what size your sensor is. So now that you've picked a camera brand, we have a smaller subset of cameras to choose from which is a little bit easier to tackle. So now that you know what you want to shoot, what size your sensor is, and what brand ecosystem you want to invest in, now you look at the options that are available. So, for example, let's just pick Sony. So, for Sony, if I wanted an APS-C camera, they offer currently on the market a A6100, an A6400, and an A6700. Those three cameras have certain features that differentiate themselves. For example, the 6700 has in-body stabilization when the 6400 and the 6100 do not. So you want to watch gear reviews that detail these specifications and figure out the key differences between the models. Once you figure out the key differences between the models, that's when doing the work in the beginning and figuring out exactly what you want to shoot. You want to see what those key differences are and if they matter for what you're trying to shoot. If your camera is going to be locked up on a tripod all of the time and you're not shooting in low light, you don't necessarily need in-body stabilization. So there wouldn't be a need for you to spend more money to move up from the A6400 to the A6700 for a feature that might not be important to you. However, if you're watching gear reviews all over YouTube, they'll tell you that it is an amazing feature because it is. I use it all the time. I'm so glad my cameras have it. I need it and I use it all the time, but that might not be something that you need. And you'll be paying for camera that you don't necessarily need and purchase too much camera. So my advice to you is look within that brand, see all of the APS-C options. If you had chosen Canon, it would be the R100, the R50, the R10, the R7. Write down a list of all of the features that are included in the nicer cameras as you move up the tiers and their pricing, and see if those features make sense for what you're trying to shoot. Now that you've picked a camera, you know about the brand, you know about the delineating features that led you to choosing that camera and how they lend well to what you're trying to shoot. The next choice, and a very important choice, is deciding what lens or lenses to get for your camera system. There are certain attributes of lenses that you need to be aware of when you're in the market looking for them. The first thing is going to be whether it is a prime lens or a zoom lens. Prime lenses are lenses that have a fixed field of view. So the lens does not zoom at all. It will have a ring on it, but that's the focus ring. When you spin that ring, you will not zoom in closer or get further back at all. Those lenses are at a fixed focal length and they're typically smaller. They typically let more light in, and in most cases, if you're not comparing them to high-end zoom lenses, they're sharper and clearer. So there are prime lenses and then there are zoom lenses, which have a variable focal length. So they can go from wide to tight by spinning the ring on the lens, and you can zoom back and forth. So that's one of the first things that you want to evaluate when you're looking at lenses, whether you want a prime lens for the portability. They are typically cheaper as well, smaller, let in more light, and sharper, or if you want a zoom lens for the versatility, but they may be a little bit larger, and if you want one with a bright maximum aperture, they're going to be more expensive. On the topic of a maximum aperture, that is the next thing that you want to consider when you're on the market looking for lenses for your camera. The aperture, you may not know what it is. It is one of the settings that go into creating images with your camera. I will have videos in the future detailing exactly what aperture is and how it affects your image. But right now, we're just going to talk about 1 to 2 aspects of what aperture can do. Lenses that have a very low maximum aperture, they let in more light and they can blur backgrounds out more effectively. So when you're looking for lenses to purchase, consider whether you are a night sky photographer and you'll be shooting in low light, or you're an event photographer and you don't know what the lighting conditions may be and you need more light, having a lower maximum aperture, for example, something like 2.8 or 1.4, they'll typically have an F in front of it. So it'll be f2.8, f1.4. Um, those apertures allow a lot more light in and will give you the tools to shoot in low light better. Or if you're a portrait photographer, they'll allow you to get that background separation and that blur easier. For zoom lenses have another wrinkle to them. So they do have a maximum aperture as well. For example, I'm shooting on a zoom lens right now that is a 16 to 35 millimeter. That's the focal length. 2.8, which is the maximum aperture. This has a constant maximum aperture. So no matter if I'm at 16 or I zoom in to 35, my aperture can open up to its maximum at f2.8 constant throughout the zoom range. Not all zoom lenses act this way. Some zoom lenses are variable aperture zoom lenses. So as you zoom through the zoom range, the lens can't let in as much light. So the lens gets darker, it can't blur the background out as effectively, and the aperture goes up. The maximum aperture goes up. So you'll see those lenses denoted as f3.5 with a dash to 5.6, f4 to 7.1. So those lenses will have two numbers that denote the maximum aperture, and all that means is as you're zooming the lens, it gets darker and the maximum aperture gets smaller. So how do you know whether a lens is zoomed in or not? That is the focal length of the lens. The focal length of the lens is denoted by a number in millimeters. So you'll often see, like this lens is a 16 to 35 millimeter lens. There are 50 millimeter lenses, 85 millimeter lenses, 135, and so on. The millimeters is not necessarily a measurement of distance, it's a measurement of focal length of the lens. The lower the number is in millimeters, the wider of a field of view you get. You can see more of an image. The bigger the number of the focal length, like 200 millimeters or 400 millimeters, is the more zoomed in and tight you're going to get on a lens. So for some examples, if it's still confusing, for landscapes, if you wanted to take a photo of the lake and the mountains and you wanted it all in your photo, something like a 16 millimeter lens or a 24 millimeter lens would be great for that because you can get a very wide field of view. But if you wanted to take a photo of something very far away or just the top of a skyscraper or the peak of a mountain that may be across a lake and very far away, you would use something like a 200 millimeter lens or a 400 millimeter lens because those lenses are much more zoomed in. So for there are certain focal lengths that people recommend for certain types of photography. 50 millimeters is going to be close to what our eye perceives for most people. So 50 millimeter primes are a very good recommendation for people who are getting into maybe portraiture or some street photography because the 50 millimeter lens is very similar to how we perceive life. Normally, 35 millimeters, we're getting wider than 50 millimeters, is very good for environmental shots. So if you were traveling and you were going to a new city, 35 millimeters will be wide enough for you to get some photos of the park or maybe some streets that are interesting or some interesting life moments. And then 200 millimeters would be something really good for up close headshot photography if you were taking photos for someone's LinkedIn profile and you really wanted that compressed kind of close-up look. Um, 85, 135, 200 millimeters are great for that. So if you were looking for kind of an all-around lens, you don't necessarily know what you're trying to shoot, or you do know you want to shoot a bunch of things, a lens like a 24 to 70 zoom lens might be perfect for you for its versatility, its ability to go wide to 24 and then tight for 70 is one of the most versatile lenses available on the market. If you are a vlogger and you record yourself and your camera's only going to be an arm's length away from you, something like a 16 to 35 would be awesome. It does give you a little versatility because it does zoom. Um, and you're able to get that wide field of view so that you can hold your camera pretty close to you and still be able to fit everything in frame. So, taking a look at the millimeters and the maximum aperture are going to be the two largest deciding factors for picking a lens for your kit. Your style of photography might require a very specific type of lens. If you like close up macro photography, you need to pick something like a 100 millimeter macro lens so that you can focus close and do that type of photography. So, the two most important pieces of purchasing a lens is going to be the focal length and the maximum aperture. All of the ancillary pieces like size, how sharp the glass is, how quickly it focuses, all of those things are great and you can consider them. But when you're starting out, those two things are paramount. What focal length? So, what field of view? Whether it has a large maximum aperture or not, whether it's good in low light or not, and give you that background separation is going to have the biggest effect on the look of your images. And whether you want to go for something small and compact like a prime and it doesn't, change the field of view, or you want something larger with more versatility, a zoom lens. So, to recap one more time and belabor this point, whether it's zoom or prime, what focal length it is, and if that matches what you're trying to shoot, and how large is that maximum aperture. Is it f4? Is it 2.8? Is it 1.8, 1.4? Um, or if it's a zoom lens, is it a constant maximum aperture, or does it get darker and change as you zoom the lens? Thinking about those things will allow you to know that you're getting the right tool for what you're trying to shoot. The last thing that I wanted to bring up was the question of whether to buy older models of cameras used or buy newer models new. That question is really up to you and the budget that you have. Everything that was mentioned before in this video still applies. You should still see what options they had at the time for older models, see what the newer models are offering, and whether those delineating special features that they added in the new models make sense for what you're trying to shoot specifically. If they do, you need to weigh the cost to benefit there and see if it's worth coughing up some extra coins to get some features that might aid you in your photography or videography journey. Another thing that I wanted to talk about as well is the idea of getting the best camera under $1,000 or the best camera under $2,000. If you approach picking out a budget for your camera gear that way, you'll be buying a boilerplate camera that YouTube has heavily marketed towards people because people think that it's a good camera for the money. I would not necessarily go about it that way. I would pick the device that fits what you're looking for the best and seeing how much that costs, and then figuring out whether you can stretch the budget to reach that. And if you can't, what features are you okay sacrificing to get a more affordable camera model or more affordable lens that will still get the job done? But if you're just looking for the best camera under a certain amount of money on YouTube or online, you're going to get options that aren't tailor made for the type of photography you're doing. If you follow the process that we've laid out in this video, you'll always land on a piece of gear that will get the job done in a very appropriate way. Are you going to be picking a camera that is full frame or crop sensor? You've picked the brand ecosystem that fits your style of photography and what you're looking for the best. You went on to evaluate the options that are available. They don't necessarily have to be the newest models, but it could be the older models as well. You compared the specifications between those models. You saw what the differences were and what made sense for you out of those features. You moved on to the lenses that you'll be attaching to those cameras. The zoom and the focal length of those lenses are appropriate for your style of photography. The maximum aperture is going to help you with your style of photography. And once you figure that out, you have the options that are in front of you. You see how much they cost, and you can decide whether you want to go with the premium 16 to 35 2.8, or you can go with something that may be a 17 to 40 f4, right, which may be a little bit cheaper. So figuring out whether you want to buy new or used is really up to what features you're willing to sacrifice. I always recommend getting the newest technology on the market if your budget can stretch that way, because there's going to be new technologies that allow lens manufacturers and camera manufacturers to make things smaller, more efficient, and provide some luxuries that older camera gear might not be able to provide. But overall, hopefully that was helpful in helping you decide what camera is good for you. If I were to blanketly hand out recommendations for someone who is just generally looking for a good device that is well priced, if you're going for an APS-C camera, I would recommend the 6400 in Sony's lineup. I would recommend the Canon R10 in Canon's lineup. And for Nikon, I would recommend the Z50. Those are all wonderful APS-C cameras that I think are priced appropriately and will get the job done. If you're looking for full frame options, whether you do a little bit of photo and a little bit of video, all of these cameras are hybrid cameras that are able to tackle anything you put in front of it. For Sony, it would be the camera that I'm shooting on. It would be the A7 lineup. The newest one would be the A7 IV. For Canon, it would be the R6 Mark III. And for Nikon, it would be the Z6 Mark III. All three of those cameras do photo and video very well, have tons of professional features. They're priced appropriately and will be able to get the job done if you wanted some options. But personally, I would go through, ask yourself all the questions that we mentioned in this video, understand those attributes of the cameras and the lenses that make them special, and the brand ecosystem. And no matter where you land, you'll be very, very comfortable with your choice. And no matter what you see on YouTube, you'll fall in love with your camera because you picked it for what you want to do and not what reviewers are telling you to pick. Thank you for your time. I know this was a long one. Next, I'll be talking a little bit about some manual settings, because first we brought up how to approach photography as a concept. Now we've talked about what camera and lens to pick. Next is going out and go shooting. So I'll explain what shutter speed is, aperture, and ISO, and basically how to set up your camera for success.